All right, so we had started playing around with this application where it was a to-do list that allowed us to enter the title and the notes for a to-do task, right? You would click to-do to add it to the list. Right now, it's showing a hard-coded list of to-dos, right? Down below, it was just plain old HTML, right, that we use as a template to create a dynamic version of this, right? So the first half here that you see to do 1, to do 2, and so on and so forth, all the way up to do 6, those are dynamically generated by the JavaScript Angular library. The ones below, pick up kids, make dinner, all those were hard-coded HTML, right, that we just added there just to see what the layout would look like, right, what the to-dos would look like. So that, and then I believe we used the very first one as a template, right, to generate the dynamic content. All right, so let's review that real quick. We had here's the index page, right? The index page has is using links to download the Bootstrap from a CDN. Right, that's the style sheet that we're using to style the buttons and the input fields. Then we have this script that is downloading the AngularJS library from Google's CDN. Right, that's installs the MVC library that we're going to be using in the lectures. Then we have our own app.js, which declares the application from using the Angular object. The Angular object that is declared right here, and then down below here we connect the view, right, to a controller, to a JavaScript, using the ngController attribute, right, pointed to a to-do controller implemented in the JavaScript in our app.js. Okay. Then we took these hard-coded HTML, and we use that as templates to create our own little template that iterated over a collection of to-dos, and as it iterated, using ngRepeat, would iterate and then would bind each instance of a to-do to this local to-do variable, right, and render the title and the note of the to-do, right. On the JavaScript end, right, we use the Angular object declared by the Angular library, and we tied it to the to-do app declared in the index. Right, there it is. It's this to-do here. Right, here's where the two worlds connect. Right, here's where the large HTML, right, the entire page refers to the app declared using the module function. We then tied a particular snippet of code, this particular div, right? We tied it to a controller that was the responsibility that took on the responsibility of this snippet of HTML. It says, I'm going to take over this this HTML piece, right, which is this to-do controller, which maps to this to-do controller right here, implemented in this constructor down here. See that constructor right there. The constructor, to be able to communicate with the HTML that it's responsible for, the communication happens through this scope variable. Right, this scope variable is it's a variable. Notice that has a $ in front of it. That means this is a variable that is being instantiated and it's managed by the infrastructure. Okay. All the variables that are declared or provided to you by the infrastructure, they all start with $. Okay, we'll see a few of them today. All right, so the $ scope allows the controller and the HTML to talk to one another. Right? We don't say the HTML, we say the view. We say that the HTML is the view. This is the this is the view. The div over here is the view template, and the controller is and this is the controller for that particular view, and they're connected to one another, right, through the scope. So, so the controller, to be able to send data over to the view, can declare variables on the scope, like for instance scope.todos, right? And now that variable is now available by the name, right? Just by the name we declared here, it's available on the view, and we're using it here, right here, okay? That's this expression to do in to-dos is interpreted by ng-repeat. Ng-repeat is an attribute declared by the infrastructure, by the Angular infrastructure. Notice it has the ng dash in front of it. So it's being declared by the Angular infrastructure. It parses the statement to do in to-dos, and it knows that it has to find the to-dos in the scope, right? It finds it. If it doesn't find it, it just ignores this expression, right? It's fail tolerant, right? If it doesn't find the references, it's okay. It doesn't complain. And then iterates. It knows to take this div and to copy this DOM element over and over and over as there are elements in the to-dos collection. Okay, right? And as it iterates, it binds each object to a local variable to do. Yes.
Can we view this code to take notes on it?
Yes, I will make this available in the on GitHub. Okay. Yes, for everyone to see. Yes. All right, so I can remove these hard-coded content that I had down below. It was only there. Perhaps the designer provided it for me, right? You know, they styled it. They give it the right styling, the right colors, the right sizes, right? And us as a developer, we take those templates, yes, and it's our responsibility to make them for real, right? To bring them alive, right? Connect them to real data. Right, and we use, but maintaining the same template and look and feel that the designer gives us, right? Because they spent a lot of effort, you know, styling it and making it look pretty, and we just need to make it so. Right. So if we re-render, notice that it's broken. What happened? Terminal. Okay, it's not running. Node server's not running. So let's start it again. Let's refresh. There it is. One thing here, notice that I'm starting the server from the command line, right? Node space server.js, and that's fine. It works, but it would be better, and actually I'm going to require from you to please instead create a run configuration. Okay, so you go to Edit, Run Configuration, and you can create a new configuration and say that I want a new Node.js run configuration. Okay, and you can name it whatever you want. In this case, I'll just call it server, right? And here you can say that this is going to it's going to use your local node, and it's going to run whatever file you want to run. And in our case, we just want to run server.js. Yes. So you make sure you're in the correct directory. Right? In our case, yes, we are in webdev template, yeah, or whatever template wherever you have your project, right? You make sure that you're in the right place, and then you type the server.js. So this is the equivalent of you typing node space server.js. Yes? But instead, you'll be able to run it by clicking a button. Right? And when you do that, it'll appear here. Right? All your run configurations will appear here at the top right. You can select it, right, and just click run. And it's the equivalent of you having typed this. It does the same exact thing, right? I'm going to refresh. Indeed, it's running, right? Or you can stop it down here, stop, and now it doesn't work, right? Or you can restart it, and now it works. And the reason I want you to do that is that this will give you the capabilities of debugging, right? Of putting breakpoints and be able to step through the code. So if I stop it, and instead of running it here, I can press on the debug here, yes, and I could put breakpoints on the server side. I can put breakpoints and click on the debug, and notice that it stops. Okay, and then you can step through the code down below, step over, and just go through each line and look at variables and such, right? So you can now debug on the client side using the inspector, right? In the console and the source, you can put breakpoints, look at variables on the browser side, yes, and then you can also debug on the server side, yes. It's very important. again, before coming to the TAs and myself, if you have a problem, something's not working, please put the effort to debugging this on the client, on the server, trying to tell us more or less what it is that you did, and give us an idea of where you think the problem might be. Yes, that will help us help you faster. Okay. All right. So if you do come to the TA hours or myself, I don't want to see that you come and you type node space server.js, right? That'll give me a clue that you haven't debugged this that much, right? That you haven't enough effort to debug this, right? If you do come to TAs and office hours, I do want to see that you've put some breakpoints and you're stopping and see here's the client and I'm on the server and that you put some effort on debugging this. Yes, all right, all right. Okay, so let me restart this. Okay, so right now this is coming. This data is coming from the controller, from right here, right to do and the node. We would like to be able to add new to dos to this, right? So let's do that. To do that, we have a button right here. We have this button, and when we click on that button, we would like to notify the controller that the user has generated an event. Okay, that they have clicked on this button, and and we should respond to that event, right? So to do that, we can notify the controller that indeed we have clicked this button by using the attribute ngClick, right? ngClick, and notify some function on the controller. So we can say maybe we could call it add to do. Not toto. Add to do. Right? Actually, we're going to say create to do. Create to do because I'm gonna follow the nomenclature of CRUD. Right? CRUD meaning C for create, R for read, U for update, and D for delete. Right? Any entity, right, that we're going to be manipulating, we're going to need at least those 4 actions. Right? In this case, the entities are the to-dos. Each to-do is referred to as an entity. Right? Each to-do is an instance of an entity. Right? The entity is a to-do. It has a schema. Right? To-dos have a schema, have a title and a note. Right? That's the schema of our to-do entity. Yes. And each row is an instance of that entity. Right? And each entity will have associated at least 4 actions: create, read, update, and delete. CRUD. All right. So create the to-do. All right, so we want to be able to invoke this function on the controller, right? The controller is the one responsible for handling all these events. The view should never be responsible for handling any of this. So to do that, where would it find this function? Just like the data is found on the scope. The functions are also found on the scope. All right. Remember, the scope is the way that we communicate back and forth. So scope. Dot create to do, right? We could put the function right here, right? But as you'll see that as we create several of these functions, right, it'll become harder and harder to read, right? Because we'll have functions up here, functions down there, all the way through, right? It'll be harder to read. So a better practice is to declare this like this, right? And then just have a function down here. Create to do. Right, this is a little cleaner, even though it's the same thing, right? The same thing. What it allows me to do is create several of these functions way up here at the top, right? So that it'll make it easier for whoever's reading my code, right, to quickly look at the event handlers way at the top, right, without having to actually read the code down below, right? It just makes it easier to read for my colleagues, right? So right now we only have one. We only have just this one event handler, create to do. Okay, so if I say here, as I say console log, okay, and I inspect this, I look at the console here, right? If I refresh and I click on this to do, notice that it is indeed reaching my create to do function. Yes, they're now connected. That button, that click, is now connected to that function. Okay, everybody okay? Right. But as I told you, I don't want you using console. Instead, I want you to put breakpoints and things like that. Right. So we'll do that in a minute. All right. So if I create this to do, ideally I like to stay as much as possible. I like to stay within some object-oriented methodology. Right. We want to apply some OO to this. So to do that, I like to be able to kind of like pass here some object that represents the data that I want to create, right? That is represented on the view. So this to do has, notice that this variable has absolutely nothing to do with this variable down here, right? This is a local variable inside of some for loop, right? It's just local to that smaller scope, right? It has nothing to do with some higher scope variable. So this to-do hopefully would have the same schema as my to-do object that I want to manipulate. So the schema would be that this to-do would have a title and would have a note. Yes? Where are those on the view? Well, I can name them. Here's my input field. I would like to associate this input field to some variable, right? Some object that might have attributes associated with it, right? So to do that, I want to associate it kind of like to a schema, to a model, a data model, right? So to do that, there is an attribute, an Angular attribute called ngModel. This allows us to tie the view data, such as input fields and whatnot, tie them to a data model that can then be treated in an object-oriented way. All right? So we could say that this input field is associated to an object to do who has an attribute of title. Okay, so not only can the controller generate data, the view can also generate data, right? And we can have them talk to one another back and forth. Same thing with the text area. ngModel, and we can say that this is the to-do and this is the notes, or just note. Okay, make sense? Right, so we have created an object on the view that has those two attributes. So now I can pass this to do as an argument, and then on the controller I can listen. I can reach this to do, right? And we can do a console log to do. I'm using console only for educational purposes, right? I don't want to see any console log on your GitHub source code, all right? So if I refresh and I, pick up milk, okay, and my wife wants organic milk. I say to do. Notice that I receive the object on the controller side, right? And there it is. That's the object that I receive on the controller side. See that? So instead of a console, perhaps I could have used a breakpoint. So I could have put a breakpoint here, right? And I can do the same thing to do. Notice that I have a breakpoint. I can stop and see what's coming from the view, and fully see the data that is coming between the template and the controller. Okay. So please use this these tools, right, to debug your code on the client side and also on the server side. Continue. Everybody okay? Everybody good? All right. And notice that this is getting out of hand, right? It's starting to look hard to read, right? So I would ask you to please make your code easier to read by adding white spaces, right? For us human beings that need to read your source code, right? So for instance, here, notice that this is becoming quite long, right? To read from left to right. So add white spaces, right? For instance, over here, right? Break up the input fields into 2 lines so that each line is easily read. So it's in the ngModel, the class, each one is its own line, right? So it's easier for us humans. The browser doesn't really care, right? Whether you put the white spaces or not, right? It's because others are going to be reading this. Same thing here. I'm going to add some white spaces here in the text area, and some white spaces here in the button to do. There we go. Okay, us humans, we love to see this indentations, right? These tabs, these new lines, makes it easier on our eyes. All right. This behaves exactly the same way, right? We didn't break anything. What else? Okay, I want to show you something here, right? If I put just like we declare this this to do object on the view, yes. Yeah, so that it will be tied to true or false, right? So if it's selected, it'll be true. And if it's not selected, it'll be false. Same thing. What do you mean? Okay.
So if I write the same ng model, let's say todo.list as the name for the checkboxes.
Right.
So all the checkboxes will have the same ng model.
No, each one would have to have a different names, right? So one would be, you know, say it's a movie and has several genres, right? So one is horror, you know, comedy, blah blah blah, right? And so the radio buttons, you might have several groups of radio buttons, right? And they might be, you know, they should be mutually exclusive, right? So yes, in the radio buttons, you would have them use the same ng model, and the value can be only one, right? Whatever you selected, you actually selected, right? And each one would have a value associated with it. In the checkbox, they all would have to have different ng models, right? So
How do you check if one of them has been checked? Something like if it exists or something. If it
yeah, so say you have a radio button, right? So this could be you know, input field, and this could be type radio, right? And radio could be the value could be maybe if it's a priority, right? So if it's urgent, it's right. So this could be you know, ng model priority priority. Okay, so this would be to do dot priority, right? And the value for this would be where's the priority? Would be urgent. Right, so this would be urgent. This would be maybe a label. Urgent. Something like this. And you might have another radio button that says not urgent or normal priority, right? And to make this mutually exclusive, notice that they're both selected, right? And there's no way to distinguish between them. This would be normal. Right, to make them mutually exclusive, they have to have the same name. So this is name equal priority. Okay, so they're mutually exclusive. Because they have the same name, the browser knows that they can't both be selected, right? Because they have the same name. So if you have several groups of radio buttons, right, if you want the different groups to be mutually selective, they would have to have different names. Okay? To know that, you know, these are priorities, these are genres, these are whatever, right? And each one might have several radio buttons associated with it, right? And as I click one, notice that the other one unselects, right? And so if I do a to do, and I hover over it, oops, to do, did I pass it? I did pass it. Wait, let me refresh. Continue. Did I ng model to do, right? Is it in the same? Is it in the same ng value? Wait a minute. No, it shouldn't matter. So to do. Huh, it's not passing it. Why aren't you passing it? ng model to do priority. Radio name priority. Let me look into this input field. Why is it not working? Let me see radio. Let me try checkbox. To do. Okay, so all right. So priority says true, right? Because they have the same name, right? So let me change these two names. Let's call this urgent, and call this normal. Oh, they have the same. Since they have they have it tagged to the same ng model. Whatever is one, they're both going to be the same exact value. So you want this to be radio. Why does the radio not work? Radio. All right, let me look into radio. Right, I'll find out. Okay, let me hide this for a second. All right, so let's. What I wanted to show you is that if I use that same variable because it's locally declared right here, to do, right? Notice that if I create a little template here that says to do, notice that this to do is declared by the view, right? It's declared by the view, and I'm rendering it right here, right on the view under the button, right? So if I render this and I start typing here, pick up. Notice what's happening, right? Notice what's happening, right? The view sees the template, says it's referring to an object that is being declared locally, right? And says, oh, well, whatever happens to that object, right? Whatever happens to that object, it's being declared to be rendered in line with the rest of the HTML, right? So pick up milk. And I only have the title attribute as declared. I don't have anything for the notes, right? It's treating this as an object, right? The notes are null, right? But as I start typing, right, I can see the value right away, right? Organic milk, right? And then I click on to do, and is being console displayed, right? There it is. Right, so it's being treated as an object. That's my point. All right, let me remove that. Right, and as I pass it along here, I can just add it to the current list of to-dos, right? So if I say scope, right, scope to-dos, right? That's what? That's the current array that contains all the to-dos, right? I can just add it to it by pushing on that array. Push is a normal JavaScript, native JavaScript function that allows you to add elements to an existing array. I can say to do. Right, if I refresh this, and I say pick up milk, organic, and say to do. Notice what happens is that it's being added to the bottom. Right. Notice that I haven't had to update any DOM. Right. I hadn't had to if I were using things like jQuery or plain old JavaScript, I would have to create the element. I would need to add it to the DOM. There was no need to do any of this, right? Let me just show you to you. I'm gonna empty this array. I'm gonna start with an empty array, so that it's you can see what's going on here. It's an empty array. So when I render it, notice that there are no to-dos, right? Right. So if I start typing here and say to do, notice that it's being added to the collection, to the iteration. Excuse me. Excuse me. Notice that there's no flicker, there's no re-rendering of the page, there's no jarring feedback, right? The feedback is immediate, right? Because what happens is that the function that we're invoking, right, is updating a data model that somebody is listening to, right? Notice that here we're manipulating an array that someone else has declared interest on, right? This ng repeat over here, this ng repeat depends on that collection, right? So anything happens to that collection, right? This ng repeat wants to know about it, right? So what happens here is that these ng repeats, all these Angular attributes, kind of work together, right? By declaring listeners, right? They're like observer. You're using the observer pattern, right? The design pattern that anything happens to this data model, I want to be notified, right? So that because I'm dependent, I need to maintain this list of to-dos, right, in the DOM. Right? So if the list changes, I need to know about it because I need to render it. Okay. If you were using server-side technologies, you would have to re-render the entire page, right? Throw out the entire HTML and re-render the entire page, even though, right, only one div changed. Yes. Right. So we're seeing the fruit of this technique, right? Of only having to update just a small snippet of the HTML without having to re-render the entire HTML page. Make sense? Yes.
So does that mean this div is re-rendered every time there's an update to the?
Not all the divs, right? Only the very new, the brand new div that has been added, right? So if it has, say, 20 of these divs, right, and I add a new to-do, the original 20 divs are left alone, right, and just a new div is appended at the bottom.
On these to-do, right, H3P.
Yes.
Enclosed by this one div.
Yeah.
So that entire div is supposed to be re-rendered, right?
No, it takes up. So what? Let's watch. Let me do another one. Yep. I gotta do one more thing. Okay, so this is a good point that I'm trying to see. Notice what's going on here. I'm changing this, right, and it's changing on the bottom. You see that, right? And what Angular does as well, because it's following object-oriented patterns, right? These are pointers, right? This to-do object, that I declared, locally, right? I'm going to keep a reference on it like a pointer, and it's being added to the collection verbatim, right? So that if you go back and try to modify the to-do, where is that to-do now? In the collection. So if you modify the original one, and it's being added by reference to this collection. If you modify the original, we have pointers to the same place, right? So in this particular case, what we would want to do is clone, right, or push on the array a copy of the original object, not the original object, because we're gonna, we have this to-do which allows it to. It's kind of like the template where we're grabbing the information, but we want to push copies to this. So there's two ways. Well, I'll get back to what your question here. Var new to-do. I can create a brand new to-do and copy each one of the elements following the same schema. So we have a title. I'm going to copy the to-do title, and note the to-do note, right? Oops, to-do, and then push the new to-do, right? So that I go here and I paste one to-do. If I try another one, notice that I no longer have reference to that object because it's really a copy. All right, so going back to your question, right? If I inspect this, notice that the div is being copied and pasted over and over. Here's one div, here's another div, right? For each one of them. So if I hover over this div, it's that one on the left-hand side. If I hover over this other div, it's the one on the bottom. See that? What's happening here is that I'm saying that this is that div is the template which you're going to grab and copy and paste it, right, for every instance, right, in the object, right? Yes.
So what's the use of to-do and to-dos here then? Like if it's copy pasting it again and again, so what is the use of ng repeat in the div?
I'm sorry, say again?
So what is the use of ng repeat statement in the div if you're copy pasting it again and again?
This over here?
Yeah, the ng repeat part. So
Yep.
Isn't that supposed to be like it's added to that and it automatically does it for every new thing we add, every
Yep.
new to-do we add?
Yep.
So it should be like that, or why is it copy pasting it again and again for every new step?
Well, it is. You're saying take this, the whole thing, right? Where the ng repeat is declared on, right? Whatever DOM element, right? Take that, copy that entire div, right? And for every instance in the collection, just copy and paste it, append it to wherever you are, right? So take this one right now. If you don't have any, if to-dos is empty, right? The length is 0 or null or whatever. This entire div won't even appear, right? It will not be. It will not even be added to the DOM, right? So for every instance to do of elements, it'll be cloned, right? The DOM will be cloned again. It will take this, copy it into its own memory space, right? And then clone it for each time and add the DOM elements dynamically into the page. Okay, not what's inside, right? It's the whole thing, including what's inside. Okay, right? Perhaps some folks might have understood a little better if you have like a UL, like a parent UL, and then an inside. You might have a children LIs, many LIs that are cloned. Perhaps that might be an easier way to understand it. But nevertheless, that's the point, right? You take the div or the DOM element, right, and you just copy and paste as many as there are, right? Okay. So let's take this a little further. Say, so we created the C in the CRUD, right? But we can create any number of these elements. We already did the read, really, right? Because we can. There's really two versions of the read. One is I want to be able to read one, right? I want to read one of these to-dos. Maybe because I want to be able to update it, or maybe I want to see the details of the to-do, right? We have one of those. There's two versions of the read. One is read one. The other one is read all. Right? Give me all the instances of the entities, right? Because I want to render them all like a list, and we already have that. Right? We already have the reading of all these to-dos. Let's try out the remove, right? Being able to remove an existing to-do. Okay. Let's add a a delete button or something that allows us to remove these. To do that, I'm going to use an X, a glyphicon. Right, I'm going to use this glyphicon over here. Right, to use that glyphicon, it's a bootstrap, a standard glyphicon, and the way to include these glyphicons, it's documented here. You just use span. Inside of span, you can use these as classes. Right, these are classes. So let's do that. Let's add a span here. Right, and I'll copy that glyphicon right there. Right, if I refresh my to-dos, I don't have any to-dos. So I don't have to every time have to create a to-dos. Let me put some hard-coded to-dos in there. Let me create just a couple here. So I'll say milk, note, let's say organic, and I'll say another one titled kids school. All right, so we have that. There's the X over there. Let's show it so maybe it's on the right-hand side, right? So that we can click on it. Let's see. Let's make it go all the way to the right. Let's make it a hyperlink, right? So that so it's nice and blue. Let's re-render. There it is. And we want to make it show all the way to the right. So there's classes for that. There's bootstrap classes for that. So we can say class pull all the way to the right. All right, pulls it all to the right, but I would like to be on the top, right? So that above, right? So let's do that. Let's bring this hyperlink. Let's bring it up here. Okay, there it is, right? So we have X's for each one of them. And when I click on it, I'd like to be able to remove this particular one. Right? So let's do that. What I'd like to be able to do is notify, say ng-click, notify the controller that I want to remove, so it's CRUD, so deletes, right? So delete to do. Right? Which to do? I like to remove the to do that we are currently rendering. Right? So if it's the first to-do that we're rendering, I like to remove that one. Right? So if I say to-do here, notice how cool this is, right? Because we're iterating over a collection. each to-do object is being used to render the current instance, yes? And there's going to be a whole bunch of these delete to-dos, right? Each one for each one of the divs that is being copied and pasted. Well, the infrastructure is smart enough to know that which to-do was used to render which div. Okay, it keeps track of which DOM element is linked to which to-do instance, right? So if we re-render this and we go to the console and we clicked on this to-do, right now we don't have a delete to-do on the controller. Let's declare one of those, right? So let's copy this to-do. Let's go back to the controller and let's create another event handler. We'll say scope dot delete to-do. Notice that I'm declaring all my event handlers at the top, but implementing it down at the bottom, right? If I have 10 of these, right, it's better to declare them at the top so that whoever's reading my code, can very quickly look at the collection of all the event handlers, right? If they care to see how they're implemented, they can scroll down and see the implementation, but they don't have to, right? If they just want to look at the list, they're nicely tucked all the way at the top, right? So let's implement them down below. Delete to do, and it's going to receive the to do that I want to remove, right? For now, let's just print it out, right? So that if I click on this to do, notice that it tells me that it's the milk to do that I want to remove. See that? Right? If I click on this, notice that it's the kids to do that I want to remove, right? So notice it's very object oriented, right? We're being able to code this in a very object oriented way. Also, notice that the controller, even though it's connected to this DOM, right, has absolutely no idea what the DOM looks like, right, or what is the view doing with any of the data, right? And that's a good practice, right? We would like to create these abstraction layers, right, where the code shouldn't know anything about the rendering, and the rendering shouldn't know anything about the code, right? It's model view controller at its best. Okay, it's very, very object oriented. All right, so we want to remove this from the original list. What we could do is try and find that to do in the original collection, right? And then just splice it out from that collection. Right? So what we could do is say, I'm going to find the index of where that to do is in the original collection. So I can grab the original to dos, right? We can say, what's the index of this to-do object, and this is a reference, right? It says, I'm looking at this reference. Where does it appear in the original collection, right? This will tell me the index of, it's a native JavaScript function that iterates over a collection, comparing by reference, right, the object that you're giving me, comparing it to the reference in the collection, and it tells me where it finds it. Okay. Once I have it, we can look at where it found it, right? You can say index. So if I click on this, it says 0. There it is. It found 0. It's at index 0, or it's at index 1. Right? Once we know the index, we can splice it out from the original collection. We can say to-dos. We can say splice. Splice is it's a native JavaScript function that allows you to both add things to a collection or remove things from an array. Okay, depending how you use the syntax. If you tell it how many elements, it'll remove them. Right? If you don't tell how many elements, it'll add them. Right? So for instance, you can say splice at location, so the index at location, and you tell them how many you want to remove. I want to remove just that one. If it's 1, it interprets this as a remove, right? If it's 0, it interprets this as an add. I want to add things. If you're going to add, then you need to give it an array of things you want to add, okay? But we're not adding, right? We are removing. So if we were removing, we're just going to say 1. We're removing that one element at that particular index. Make sense? And what do you think is going to happen? Notice that the data model, right, the to-dos, that array, that collection is being manipulated, is being updated. Who cares about that? Right, the engine repeat. Right, the engine repeat has an observer on this. Right, it has a listener listening on changes on this array. And what's going to do? It's going to update the div. Right. So if I go back and I remove this, notice that it's gone. All right, it's gone because it gets notified. The array no longer has that element in the array. The ng repeat gets notified. It says, hey, the array that you depend on has been modified. You need to re-update. It knows that the object no longer exists in the collection, and it removes that one div. It doesn't re-render the entire thing, right? That'd be very wasteful. It only removes that one div that was mapped to that one object that no longer exists, all right? Very, very efficiently. Okay, so we're not re-rendering the entire page. Again, if we were using a server-side technologies, PHP or JSP or ASPs, right? Typically, we would re-render the entire page, right? Which would be wasteful. Everybody okay? All right. So we were able to do create. We were able to do delete. We were able to do read all, right? Because we are, excuse me, we're just re-rendering all of them. How about being able to update? Right? I like to be able to update a particular to-do. So to do that, let's add another hyperlink here that allows us to edit, right, that particular to-do. So to do that, I'm going to grab another glyphicon. I'm going to grab the cog. There it is, this cog. And I will add another hyperlink A that is going to select that to-do for update. Right, select this to-do for updating. All right, so class, I'm going to pull it also to the right. Okay, and I'm going to span class this glyphicon. All right, so we have this cog, right? That when I click on that cog, it should ideally what it would do is that I click on that and then it would update the form at the top, so I can change the title or change the note, so I can update the note, the to-do. Make sense? I can select it. So let's do that. So now we have a new event handler, scope dot select to do, implemented in a function of the same name that receives a to do. Right. So what we're going to do is that we're going to copy the content. Right. We're going to copy the content onto the form at the top so that we can edit it. Right. So let's do that. Notice that the client, the template declared the variable to do, right? And right now we've been using it to pass it along to the function, right? As a function, as an object to the controller. Well, the controller also has just like this template can manipulate this object to do, right? The controller can also manipulate this object because they're both declared on the scope, right? They both have access. The view has access, and the controller also has access. We call this two-way binding, right? These variables are bound two ways in the view and the controller. They can both manipulate this data model, right? That can talk to one another, right? So let's do that. The to do can do a scope dot to do. That's the variable on the view, right? We can say that this is the title is equal to the to do title that I'm passing along, and the same thing for the note, right? Note. Right. So that if I select on it, it didn't work. Wait, what? Property yada yada to do eval. Okay, let's debug this. Let's look at the source. Let's put a breakpoint. Oh, did I refresh? Probably that's what it is. Did I refresh? You just select. Okay, let's put a breakpoint right here. Let's see if we are going in there. Okay, there it is. To do. Okay, we're passing. There's the note. There's the title. Scope to do. Title. And we have, there's a to-do, there's a title, there's a note, scope to-do. Oh, okay, so, all right, so it's complaining that the scope to-do is not yet initialized. Right, so let's do that. Let's initialize it. It's blank, right? So I'm going to clear out whatever's there, right, because I want to copy onto it. Okay, let's try it again. There it is, right? So it's copying onto the to-do above, right? So either copy this or that. There it is. Okay. I also need to remember. Which one did you select, right? Because we're going to add another button here, like an update button, so that we're going to need to know which instance was it that you had selected, right? Because right now we're just copying, right? We need to remember what was it that we had selected, right? So to do that, what we could do is find this to do in the original array, so we can know the original index. So we could do that. Same thing we did earlier. So here's the index, and we're going to store it in a local variable. Just store it in a local variable. Say scope selected index. Say okay. So right now it's -1 to denote that nothing has been selected yet. Okay, and we can store it. We can say that once we find the index, right, we're going to store it in this local scope index. Right, so this is what's going to do is that when you do select a to-do, it's going to find it where in the collection it is, right? And we're going to remember, right, which one did you click on, right? The first one, the second one, the third one. Which one did you click on? Yes, all right. So that let's add another button so that we can update. All right, so let's create another button so we can update. So this would be updated to do, updated to do. So update, and let's change the color maybe to success. So we have two buttons, right? If you click on the to do, let's change it maybe to create. Right, the blue one is create, and the green one is an update. Right, update would update an existing to do with the new title and the new notes. Yes, all right. So we can click on this, and we can change this to milk whatever it was. Update would update the to do over here. Yes, all right. So let's do that. Let's create another van handler. The update to do. I think that's what we called it, right? Is that what we called it? Update to do. There it is. So update to do and update to do implemented in a function of the same name, update to do, and to do right here. All right. So what is it going to do? It's going to take the original to do at location. Which location? This location, right? So selected index, right? And it's going to update the title and the notes for that particular one. Yes, right. So it's going to take the scope, all the to-dos, right? It's going to use that index. It's going to use that index, the selected index, so that we know which one are you referring to, right? And we're going to change the title to be this new to-do title. And the notes, we're going to copy the notes over as well. So this is note and note. Okay, let's see if this works. So let's edit milk, and this would be milk 1, 2, 3. And we'll say update, and it updates the title. You see that? Without re-rendering, right? Everything it's updating that one div, right? Without having to re-update the entire list, without having to wastefully refresh the entire page. Make sense? Yes?
Why do we click the starting button and the new countdown button if we
I'm sorry, say again?
So after we click this button,
Uh-huh.
why the title and notes are re-render again?
Why are we updating it here?
No, why the kids at school
Uh-huh.
are re-rendered in the input button?
Why do you mean why are we copying this content over here?
No, it's not. Okay, but so at first there's no
No content.
no characters in the input field.
Yep.
After we click the setting button,
Yep.
it appears one.
Oh, because we copied it, right? Right here in the select. Right, when we select over here, right, we say scope to do, right? We are referring to that variable in the form, right? In the form, the input field is bound by ng model to do that title, to do that note, right? Right here, right? In the form, the input field, right, is bound to do that title. So it's inside of scope dot to do that title, right? And then this one is bound to scope dot to do dot note, right? And so what we're doing here is that we're updating those. There it is, right? Scope dot to do dot title. We're copying it from the object we clicked on, right? The selected, which we're passing over here. We're passing as an argument. That's the one you selected, right? So we're copying the title on the title from one of the divs. We're copying it to the title of the form, right? And the notes of the one you selected, we're copying it to the title notes in the form. So we're copying from any one of those divs that you select. We're copying it to the note declared in the form above. Yes?
Can you explain one more time why you have to do scope.to equals empty?
Right, because if you don't, so I'm going to refresh. The object right now is undefined, right? Or it's null, right? Because I haven't typed anything, right? It's only declared. It's only declared when I start typing. Now there is an instance of a to-do object, right? But as these are they're both empty, right? It interprets it as an undefined object, right? This is good and bad because sometimes you interpret things as empty string but not null. So there's different ways of interpreting falsy. In JavaScript, there's such a thing as falsy or truthy. Truthy is something that is not undefined, is not null, it's not zero, it's not empty, it's not length 0, right? Because it's since it's a weakly typed language, right? There might be different ways to interpret certain values, right? But the way that so Angular tries to make a standard way of interpreting things, right? So for instance, if these two input fields, the input field and text area, are bound to a variable, and nobody has touched it, nobody has touched any of the attributes, right? It interprets that as undefined, right? The object is undefined right now. So by the time we select, that object is undefined. So I'm trying to update an attribute and an object that's undefined, it gives me an error, right? So knowing that it's the very first time that an object is being used, I initialize it.
So shouldn't we reinitialize it after updating so that the fields get blank again?
We could initialize it right here, right? When the controller renders, when the whole thing is loaded at first, right? Let's make it not undefined. Let's give it a empty object, right? So that it's not undefined. It has no attributes, but it's not undefined.
No, I'm saying after the update, after we're done with
To clear it?
To clear it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yep, that's a good idea. Yeah, after we update, we say mail 1, 2, 3 and say update, we can clear out the top. That makes sense. Yep.
How do you know that it's not changing again? Like, is it
You would say in the if this were a server-side application, you would see queries for the pages, right, to be re-rendering. So for instance, if I remove, right, if this were PHP, you would see the page would be posted. You would see network go back to the server. The server would then respond with new HTML, and this would re-render. Notice that there is no network activity. So it's not going to the server for anything, right? It's exclusively updating just the DOM. Right? Nothing is going back to the server. Nothing is being re-rendered. Also, you would see that it would spin, that little spinny on the left-hand side. It would spin real quick as you navigate from one page to another page, as it's being re-rendered. You see, sometimes if you have older browser, you would see even a small flash, right? The whole thing would go blank and then go back as a render. Right? As you navigate, for instance, this. Notice that it's very fast and you don't see the flashing, right? But notice that on the right-hand side, you see that there is. Okay, you see a little bit of the flash over here. See that? as that's being rendered, that flicker, the little flicker, right? That's telling you that it's re-rendering the whole thing, right? Also, there's a lot of network activity on the right-hand side for the new re-rendering. That would happen every single time if you would be using a server-side technology. Yes?
Is there a way to distinguish between the variables that we get from the view and the variables that we have in the controller? For example,
If you declare them on the scope, it's the same exact variable on both ends, right? If you declare it without the scope, then it's exclusively on the controller.
so there is a chance that while we are writing the controller code, we could override some of the variables that are already.
If you declare them on the scope, that's what you want to do. That is the intention. If you declare it on the scope, you're tying. The intention is to tie variables that are declared on both sides, so that they talk to one another. So that whatever you do on this controller happens to the view. Whatever you do on the view happens to the controller. Right? There's a larger question on what if you have many controllers, right? Or you have nested controllers, controllers within controllers within controllers, right? And so nested controllers inherit from the scopes of their parent controllers, right? Which can be a problem, right? Because what if a controller calls something on the scope, first name, and then some other controller down, a child controller also declares a scope variable, also called first name, right? Then you have a conflict of one overriding the other, right? And that's so to avoid this, we don't use scope. What we do is that we tie variables to the instance of the controller as opposed to tying it to the scope, because scope inherit from one another, whereas instances do not inherit from each other, right? And that's one of the best practices that we'll be introducing shortly, and you're required to do this in the assignment. In the assignment, you can't use scope.
Can you repeat that last little bit about not using scope?
Yeah. Yes, right. So scope, even though it's a standard way that Angular allows you to create these bindings, right? There's a design pattern that suggests that we don't use scope at all, right? To instead use the instance of the controller itself. In this case, would be this, right? It would be the pointer, the reference to the controller instance, and bind the variables on the instance of the controller as opposed to binding them to the $ scope. And we will talk about this because that's part of the assignment. In the assignment, you are required not to use the $ scope. And we'll talk about that a little later. Yes?
Why would I need multiple controllers? Like if you could give an example.
So you could have a top-level controller that handles overall events, right? Maybe the menus at the top, right? The menus on the footer, right? And then you can have one that just renders handling of the list of elements, right? Like creating things in the elements, updating them, right? And you can have other components, right? That would handle other things, right? Such as maybe a feed. So ideally, you would have a controller per entity, right? And typically, or hopefully, you make entities. One page has one entity, so you can maintain that simplicity of one page, one controller, right? But you might have entities that are related to one another, right? A user might like many movies, so you might list user information and some movies that they're following or that they've liked or they're reviewed. So you have two controllers. One that handles the user, right, and maybe another controller that handles everything about movies or songs or videos or whatever, right? So you would have two controllers handling. If you intend to render them on the same page, you would have two controllers handling the different things, right? But ideally, in a mobile application, you would try to avoid that, and you would have one page, one entity, right? And if you want to see something that is related to an entity, you would navigate to a separate page. You have a link, movies. You click on movies, and then you render all the movies. And then you go back to all the user information, right? You want to see people I'm following. You click, and then you go see the people that you're following, right? And then you come back. And those are different entities, different pages, different controllers, right? On larger desktop applications, right, you might be using several controllers at once because you have a bigger screen. You can display a whole bunch of things. On the left-hand side, you have users. On the right-hand side, you have movies or people you're following and things like that, right? It depends, right? Yes?
Can we execute create and update those on one button? And
I'm sorry?
Can we execute create and update on one single button? I mean, when you click on the setting icon,
yeah,
maybe you should create one more variable. Remember, you already like the same items and then.
Yes, you can. Right, you would have to kind of remember, I selected one, so I am going to interpret the next button as an update, right? Something like that. So so that's kind of like entering in a HCI, human computer interaction best practices, on saying you're putting some effort on the user having to remember that you're in different modes, right? If you click on this, now I'm in a different mode. This button is going to be interpreted in a different way. If I click this, it's not clear how to interpret. If you start overloading the meaning of one button, right, then you're putting some strain on the user having to remember what mode I'm in or not. It's better to make sure that that one button has one meaning. Although, sure, right? If it's clear. If it's clear that the interaction is that this puts me clearly in this mode and all the user interface makes sense, that sure, you can do that. Yeah, maybe change the label or change the color, right? And then or maybe the icon, right, goes from plus to a checkbox or something. Yes, you could do that. Yes, everybody okay? All right, so right now this is strictly a client-side application, right? If I refresh the page, any changes I had are lost, right? Because the client, the browser, is manipulating this DOM, right? And this is very ephemeral, right? The DOM, if you refresh the page, everything's gone, right? You go back to whatever the original page was. Yes. Typically, you would need a place where to store this permanently. Okay, and it's definitely not on the client side, not on the browser. You would need some server support, right? Although more modern browsers do have a small database running on their local database on the browser. You can store. There's a little SQL database that all browsers, modern browsers, support as part of the HTML5 standard, right, where you can store data in a name-value pair, like a hash table, right? It would be stored only on that one browser instance, yes? So if you're using the same browser all the time, then you could store some data particular to that particular user on the browser. But to make it more permanent, right, so that it's across any browser, as long as I log in as myself and identify myself, I can access my data. For that, I need it to be server side, right? I need to store it on the server. So let's look at that real quick on how we would go about doing that. Okay, we don't want to manipulate all this data modeling, all this manipulation of the entity on the client side is not best practice. All this data model should be manipulated on the server side. All right, so let's move some of this to the server side. Yes? All right, let's do that. Okay. Oops. All right. So let's first do some changes here. Okay. So this list of to-dos, really, all that should be in a database, right? It should be on the server side. All right. So let's do that. Let's go fetch some of this on the server side. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to declare. Notice I'm going to declare outside of the public directory. All right. My server code that might have some proprietary information, some proprietary access to databases, right? Might have some important source code that I don't want to share with anybody. I don't want to put it in the public directory. Okay, but I'm going to put it outside of the public directory, right? Because if I put it in the public directory, everybody could find this this information, right? So I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it in a new directory called to do. Okay, and inside I'm going to put my server side to-do application. Right now I have a client-side to-do application. Right, I have the Angular, the HTML, the JavaScript. Right, let's put some stuff on the server side. So here I'm going to create a small JavaScript. I'm going to call it app.js. I'm going to call it the same way I called it in the client. Right, so lectures to do. So this app.js, be careful. This app.js is code that executes on the browser. Yes? All right. Whereas this app over here, app.js, this is going to be code that, even though it's called app.js, the same way, it's code that's going to be executed on the server side. Yes? Okay, careful. And because this is being executed on the server side, it has completely different resources than the browser, right? The browser is running on somebody else's machine, right? On their browser, on their machine, inside of a very protected environment by the browser. The browser doesn't let it do all sorts of things, right? The browser stops it from accessing the file system, right? It gives it some very limited network access, okay? It doesn't have access to anything outside of the browser. Whereas over here, on the server side, this is running on my local desktop, right? It has access to the local file system. It has access to maybe a local database that is running. It has full access to the network. I can communicate with anything on the internet. I don't have the same security restrictions that I have on the browser side. Yes. Also, because it's a server side, I don't have access to the browser. Right. On the browser, the JavaScript has access to the window. Right. Has access to the buttons, to the menus. Has access to alert boxes. Right. It has access to a DOM. Right. Over here, executing on the server, I don't have any access to that, right? Because I'm not running on a browser, right? I'm running on a desktop. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to just say console log server side to do. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do on my little server, I'm going to load that app.js I just created on the server. Remember, this is server.js, yes? This is the one who's setting up the server, starting up the server, right? We're going to require, I'm going to load that app.js I just created. It's inside of to-do, and in there I have app.js. There it is, okay? All right? And if I restart my server, it says yes, stop and rerun. In the console, notice that it says server side to do, right? So I am loading that snippet of code, right? That app.js on the server. Are we okay? Yes? All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to pass it this app. See that, this app? I want to pass it app because app is the instance of the Express library, right? The Express library is a server-side library that allows me to listen in for incoming HTTP requests from the client, right? Because the client, right, has these right now has all this hard-coded data, right, on the browser, right? But it shouldn't really have any access of that on the client. It should really come back to the server for data. The data that lives on the server lives on the database, right? So that's the only way where it could retrieve data. Okay, so I want to move this over to the server side, right? So the client is going to go and have to go fetch it, right, from the server, right? Because it's not going to have any data on the client side. So I'm going to have to code here some code that can listen for incoming GET requests, right, from the Angular client. Okay, so let's do that. To do that, I'm going to create a module, exports. This is the equivalent on creating a new module, right, or new package in Java or C#, right? You can create reusable packages, right, which you can then import, right, into your code. In Angular, the way we do that. Is using Angular module, right? That's using the Angular library to create modules, right? Which can then be reused and included by other folks, right? And here, this is how you create modules in Nodejs, right? Nodejs is It's a interpreter. It's a JavaScript interpreter for the desktop, right? And it has its own libraries, right? It has its own way of creating things and reusing things, right? In Node.js, this is how you create modules. In Angular, this is how you create modules. Yes? Every infrastructure has its own mechanism, its own jargons, right? But it's the same idea. I want to create a module, and whatever goes declared in this function is available to whoever is importing it. Who's importing it right now? Server.js is importing it right here, right? And it's passing an argument of app to that module that is being declared. Okay, so I can receive that as an argument right here. Okay, I'm receiving as the module is being declared, it's being instantiated, it's receiving an argument of app. Who's app? App is the instance of Express. Express allows us to very easily create HTTP handlers. Right? We can listen for incoming GET requests, incoming posts, puts, deletes, all sorts of HTTP communication. Right? So for instance, we can say now, listen for an incoming GET request at hello. And I want to respond. Oops. I want you to respond. I want you to, here's the representation of the request, the response. I want you to respond. I'm going to send back a hello world. Okay? So if I restart my server, and I go back here and I do hello, it comes back with hello world. Right? Meaning the server I've created, on the server I've created a listener for an incoming GET request at this particular URL, right? URL pattern. Yes? If it ends with hello, I can respond with a send. What's happening here is that the server, what Express allows you to do is to tell Node.js, hey Node.js, here's a path, here's a URL path that I would like to be able to listen for, right? If you see this URL pattern, notify me, right? I want to handle it, okay? Right? That's what this app.get does, right? It allows you to declare URL patterns for which you want to listen for an incoming request, yes? And Node.js says, sure, I will listen for that incoming pattern. If I see it, right, I will notify you by calling this function that you are passing, that you're giving me, all right? Okay, some people might see this and cringe at this syntax. I did when I looked at this syntax. In JavaScript, you can treat functions like variables, right? You can pass functions just like any other variable, right? Or a string variable, or a date variable, or an integer. You can pass it as an argument to somebody else, right? And that somebody else can then use that variable and then call it. If it's a function, it can call that function. If it's an integer, it can add the integer, right? If it's a string, it can print a string, yes? If it's a function, it can call the function. Okay? Makes sense. So what Node.js is going to say is going to look for that incoming request, and if it sees that request, it's going to call this function. Yes? Right? And it's going to pass two arguments. Two arguments are going to pass to this function. One of them is going to represent the incoming request. Right, the incoming HTTP request. Notice that, right? If I say hello, notice here it is. Here's the request on the. If you go to the network tab of your browser, right, and I hit that, notice that there's the request. The request. Here's the headers. This is all the information that is being sent to the server. That request object. This request object has all this information: the connection information, the length, the content type. Right, the date, all the headers that are being passed along, right? And then the response, right? The server passes along when it calls your function, it passes two objects. One, the incoming request, yes? And it also gives you a response so that you can generate a response back to whoever called you, yes? Right? So that you can now participate in the client-server cycle, yes? You can receive requests, and then you can generate response back to the client, right? So you participate in the client-server life cycle. Okay. I can change this, right? I can say hello or goodbye. That's kind of sad. Let me restart the server. If I restart the server and refresh, notice that it says goodbye world, right? So whatever changes I'm making to that function, it's working, right? If this syntax bothers you, I can move the function out of here. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to say hello, and then declare the function down here. Say hello. Right? Some folks are disturbed by that syntax of functions within another function call. But it's actually very, very common in JavaScript. Right? You should start becoming familiar with that syntax because it's all over the place in JavaScript. Right? Especially when you start using jQuery, Angular, all these libraries. These functions that are declared inside like that have no name. Notice that it didn't have a name. Remember? Right? Those are referred to as anonymous functions. Right? They have no name. I'm passing it to you because you're the only one who's going to use this. Right? Why bother you giving it a name? Right? I'm never going to use it myself. Right? So this say hello, who's using that say hello function? Only you. Only this get is using that hello function. Nobody else is going to call it. Right? So why even bother, declaring and giving it a name? All right. Nevertheless, I think this syntax is a little bit easier to follow. Yes.
How can we get access to get parameters? If there is something like hello question mark ID.
Right. So for instance, if for instance you could say hello and then a name, you can pass in an argument as an attribute, right? This would be like a path parameter, right? And it would be parsed, right? This URL pattern would be hello / followed by something, right? And it would be available in the request. You could say var name equals request.name. Okay, so this name is this name over here, right? And then you can say goodbye world and then concatenate name, something like that. Right, so let's restart that. Restart it. So if I say hello Jose, it would undefined. Why is it undefined? Name colon?
Colon instead of
Where?
under URL.
Under URL.
That's a slash.
Where?
You've just put a slash.
Put a slash. Yeah, no, that should have worked. Wait a minute. Request name request. Oh, sorry. Dot params dot name. I don't know if it's params or param with an S. Let me start it. There it is, Jose. Okay. So what happens is that all the parameters here are parsed by the infrastructure, right? And then they're provided to you in this map as a map, right? These are the parameters, or they're queries. You could say these are referred to as path parameters, so parameters that are part of the path, right, with slashes. Yes, or you can pass query parameters like age. I'm 35. And you can query here the age from request dot I think it's query dot age, right? And then you can age. So whenever you change the server side, right, you need to restart the server. If you're changing the client side, you don't need to restart the server. Right? Okay, so be careful. So here I'm restarting the server. Age, maybe it's not query. Query, isn't it query? I thought it was query. It's not in the URL? Oh, I didn't? Okay, yeah. That would, I hate computers. They're always right. Oh, there it is. Age equals 35. Okay. I'm not really 35. So there it is. So, but let's leave that. Okay. We're gonna have plenty of this. We're gonna be playing with this quite a bit, right? let's do a couple more things. What I would like to be able to do is, again, the design pattern, all the handlers are going to be declared at the top, and all the functions that implement them, we're going to put them at the bottom. Okay? Yes?
So if there are more than one path params, you just like pass it using slashes,
Yeah, you could say, you can put a whole bunch of these.
and the order has to be the same, right?
The URL has to match exactly, right? Obviously, these would be blanks, right? These are fill in the blanks, right? But the pattern has to be the same.
But when it comes to query params, I can change the order, right?
Right, query params don't matter. Query params, you can put them in there, and you should use one for certain things and the other for certain other things, and we'll talk about that, all right? Okay. All right, so we want to do app get. I want to ask for /todo, right? Actually, I'm going to put him under lectures to do. I'm only putting lectures because I'm going to have lots of examples all throughout the semester, right? And I'm going to put them all under lectures, right? Typically, right, what you do is that you would have an endpoint. These are what we're going to be creating today. Right here is a web service endpoint, right? A URL that is meant to expose some data structure, right? Some data stored in some database, right? And it's going to provide it as a JSON response back to the client. And the endpoint typically would be the singular version of whatever entity you are manipulating, right? If you're reading, it would be a get, and if you're getting the entity to do, it would be the to do entity, right? And but again, because we're gonna have several examples here, I'm gonna put lectures in front of it, just to know that these are all lecture examples. Yes, but the entity is to do, right? In this case, we're going to read all to dos, right? And this read all to dos is going to be a function that retrieves all the to dos, right? So let's implement that. So it'd be function read all to dos request response, right? And in our case, we like to be able to respond with all the to dos as an array. So let's copy that. Maybe declare it here, variable to dos as an array. There it is, right? And we're going to respond with that array with response.send to dos. Okay, right? If we restart the server and we now query for lectures/todo, we get a JSON object, right? This is the JSON object that now lives on the server, right? As long as the server is running, this data is accessible, right? This is our very first RESTful web service, right? This is our very first RESTful web service. You'll be creating lots of these throughout the semester. Notice that it's an array of objects, right? Notice that it knows that these are JSON. Notice that, see, I didn't put quotes around my attributes. See that? Title or note, and also use single quotes for the values. See that? But the infrastructure is smart enough to know that this is JSON. I'm going to format it in a correct JSON, right? Notice that it's quoting everything, right? It's using double quotes instead of single quotes. It's smart enough to know that this is JSON. Make sense? Actually, the send function is very smart, right? It can send all sorts of things, not only strings, JSON. It can send all sorts of things like files and whatnot. But if you know it's JSON, if you know that what you're sending back is explicitly JSON, it's a good practice to actually use the JSON function. The JSON function, it's not as smart, right? But it only works with JSON, right? So you leave out a little bit of overhead, right? So that the send doesn't have to figure out what it is, right? So JSON just assumes this is JSON. It's not going to make any assumptions. It's just going to send it verbatim. Everybody okay? All right. So back on the client, right? We can now do away with this, right? We can say to dos. We're going to have this empty array because this data no longer lives here. Where does it live? It lives on the server side, right? We have to go fetch it from the server. Let's go fetch it from the server. To do that, we need to make an HTTP request to the server, right? To do that, we're going to use another Angular service. These over here, scope, and all these $signs, these are services. They're called services. So we're going to use the HTTP service to go and fetch this information, right, from the server, right? So let's do that. We're going to say $HTTP dot. We're going to generate a GET request. We're going to generate an HTTP GET request. The URL is /lectures/todo. Okay, and this is going to respond with an HTTP response. Yes. So this is going to be an asynchronous call, right? The client is going to make this long-term request to the server. The server, at some point, a couple milliseconds later, or it might take even longer, right, is going to respond, right? It's an asynchronous call. The browser only has one JavaScript thread, right? It has only one JavaScript thread. It can't take the luxury of having this thread busy waiting for the response from the server. Okay, it can't take that luxury. So instead, it's going to do an asynchronous call, right? It's going to ask the server. It's going to ask the browser, because the browser does have lots of threads, right? It's going to say, hey browser, you deal with this GET request, right? I'm going to keep going, right? Because I have a lot of things to do. I have to animate a whole bunch of things. I have to listen for people clicking. I have to, I can't get busy with this call. You handle it, this HTTP request. When it comes back from the server, notify me, right? Let me know when it's successful or not. If it's not successful, if it times out or whatever, right? So what we do here, we can say a dot success. So I'm going to give you a function here that I want you to notify me if whatever query comes back, right? So I'm going to say function. Again, a jarring syntax, a function declared inside of a function call, right? But again, you have to start becoming familiar with the syntax. It's all over in JavaScript. So this function is being passed. This function is being passed to this function, which is going to use it to call us back when the response comes back, right? And when the response comes back, it's going to pass it to us. It's going to call this function. It's going to pass us the response function. And for now, we're just going to say console log response and see what the response is. Right. So if we now go back to lecture mean to do, okay, we'll see that the very last thing that happens here in the network, see that? That's the call going out to the server. You see it? You see you can see the HTTP, the general. There it is. Oh no, that's not it. To do. There it is. Lectures to do. See that? And here's the response. The response is that array that's coming back from the server, right? Also in the console, we wanted to display. There it is. Those are the two objects that are coming from the server. And down below, it's not rendered yet, right? Because we didn't do anything with that data. The data came back from the server, but we just dropped it on the floor. We never did anything with it, right? What do we want to do? Right here, we could just say $scope.todos is equal to the response. Right? So we can refresh, and now we have back our milk, right? And our kids. See that? Those to-dos. But where is it coming from? From the server. Right? The client doesn't have any of this data, only from the server. So we implemented one of the CRUD operations, the read, right? The read all. We would need to re-implement all the other ones, the create, the delete, the update. All these need to be moved over to the server, right? When we delete, we're going to delete something from the server. When we update, we're going to update on the server, right? The client is never responsible for any of the actual data. The data only lives on the server and in the database. Make sense? All right. Am I out of time? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna leave it here. I didn't get to talk about the first assignment. All right. So I'm gonna post several things on the assignment. Please read the first assignment. Well, I'm sorry. It would be the second assignment, right? Please read that. Go through the various wireframes. The wireframes are inside of the document, and we're going to be implementing just a static HTML and CSS only, no JavaScript. This assignment is only HTML and only CSS, no JavaScript, unless you want to get started. Right? But there's no JavaScript in this assignment. is going to be all static, and clicking on the links just navigates to different pages, right? We're not going to be using single page applications until we get to Angular and we get to routing and all that, and that's the third assignment. So, so this should be pretty simple. It's just static content. Let me stop this for a second.